All right, folks, let's see. Last week I had a debate of sorts with an individual who goes by Mr. Paradox on Paltalk. He did have a buddy of his that was on there that was kind of backing him up a little bit. He goes by the title or the handle of the Calvinist. Now, what happened was one of my subscribers, um, we'll keep him anonymous for the time. He had met me over there on Pal Talk, and he said, "Hey, dude, there's this guy over here that's a staunch compatibilist, and I know that you're a staunch determinist. So I would love to see you guys go at it, if you will, on the subject of determinism and compatibilism." Given the fact that any of my viewers know that I am a fervent determinist and I speak out against compatibilism. And we were on there, and I decided, okay, yeah, let's do this. And so he and I started to go round and round, discussing and presenting our position. It was nothing that was formal or, with time limits and things of that nature. It was more of a discussion, but it kind of a debate, though. Um, and I'm sorry, guys. It was, we were there for a good hour or so. I should have recorded this. I should have recorded this. It would have just been a matter of a click of the button, and it would have been recorded, and I could have uploaded it here for YouTube for the edification of the saints. But I didn't, so I apologize. I will keep that in mind next time I get into deeper discussions on Pal Talk. Now, the point of this video is to illustrate, one, why I'm not a compatibilist, and two, to point out who the real Calvinist is. In our discussion, basically what ended up happening, I was promoting the idea, and again, if you guys follow along with my videos, you know my position. I believe, as a determinist, I believe that God not only decrees whatsoever comes to pass from eternity, but that God actively brings about that which he's decreed. He actively brings everything about, and everything means everything. Okay? And so there's no reason to discuss free will in any context, whether it's a libertarian or compatibilistic understanding of free will, because there's no such thing. Okay, so in our little debate, what ended up happening, I'm not going to go through all of it. There's a lot of things, but as I said, I should have recorded it. But basically, in the end, it was this. He was basically saying this. Given my position, he says, if what you are saying is true, that God actively brings about that which he's decreed from eternity. This is what he, let's see, let me pull it up real fast. This is what he called me. He says, one, that's blasphemous. Two, he says that that's hyper-Calvinism. Three, he said that that is out of step with the Reformed faith. And four, he said that's fatalism. Okay, so in effect, what he was presenting was this, that, to put it in his words, he says, God decrees whatsoever comes to pass, and then it just plays out. Okay, let me repeat that for you. Follow along. God decrees whatsoever comes to pass, and then it just plays out. Those were his exact words. Something else he said to go in line with that statement is he called God the first mover. Okay, so that goes in line with the idea that it just plays out. So by this time in the conversation, he had left. I had left, or I was trying to leave, and then I got back on, and he had left, and so we kind of didn't get to finish it up. Here's the problem. What he was arguing was a form of dualism and a form of deism. Okay? That is, he was trying to argue that it just plays out. that history just plays out. God does not have an active role in bringing about that which he has decreed from eternity. That's why he called him the first mover, not the only or ultimate mover. Just the first mover, and then it plays out. That's very common of the, I'm sure many of you are aware of the watchmaker analogy, that God is the great watchmaker. But again, that is not what the Bible presents. That is, the watchmaker analogy, or as he put it, the first mover analogy, says that God created everything, set everything up, and then it just plays out. Or, given the watch analogy, that God creates the watch, the gears and the battery and everything, but the gears and the battery is what carries it along. We might liken that to laws of nature, like gravity. And so, in other words, what he was promoting as a compatibilist was that, in effect, now I couldn't get the details out of him at this point, but in effect, that there's some other power out there that is carrying things along. Now, what power he attributes, I don't know, whether it be laws of nature, the will of man, whatever it is. But the question is, what is the power behind the playing out? When he says God decrees and then it just plays out. Well, what power is carrying that playing out? What power is carrying it along? If it's not God, then you are stuck with dualism. There are two powers operating. You have God, and then you have another power that's carrying everything along so that it plays out. And that's also a form of deism. Deism basically teaches that God just creates everything, and then he just kind of kicks back and watches everything play out. He doesn't get involved. He's not active. He doesn't get his hands dirty. That's deism. So I don't know that all compatibilists would agree with his assessment. So I don't want to label all compatibilists, but the two that I was dealing with, they were certainly promoting this, dualism and deism, that God does not actively bring about that which he decrees. And so, of course, once again, he labeled my position, that God actively decrees and actively brings about that which he decreed. He labeled it as blasphemous, hyper-Calvinism, out of step with the Reformed faith, and fatalistic. Now, what I'm going to do at this point, and please just strap on your seatbelts and follow along. I'll try to read through them quickly. I got a handful or two handfuls of quotes that I would like to read you. Okay, these are the quotes I would like to read you. Please pay attention. Quote 1. It is cold and lifeless to represent God as a momentary creator, who completed his work once for all and then left it. Here, especially, we must dissent from the profane and maintain that the presence of the divine power is conspicuous, not less in the perpetual condition of the world than in its first creation. In other words, when he's saying momentary creator, that God just creates and then moves on, just kind of sits back. And this individual says that's profane. That God is not just the one who creates, but he carries it along as well. Next quote. After learning that there is a creator, it must forthwith infer that he is also a governor and preserver, and that not by producing a kind of general motion in the machine of the globe, as well as in each of its parts, but by a special providence sustaining, cherishing, superintending all the things which he has made, to the very minutest, even to the sparrow. In other words, he's saying that God does not give the globe, the machine, some independent power of motion, that God is the one that carries it along. Next quote. Again, when we read that that at the prayer of Joshua the sun was stayed in its course, that as a favor to Hezekiah, its shadow received 10 degrees. By these miracles, God declared that the sun does not daily rise and set by blind instinct or nature, but is governed by him in its course. Let's go on to the next one. God is deemed omnipotent, not because he can act, though he may cease or be idle, or because by a general instinct he continues the order of nature previously appointed, but because, governing heaven and earth by his providence, he so overrules all things that nothing happens without his counsel. So, in other words, God's omnipotence is not defined as God simply being powerful enough to do the work, but rather he is doing the work. That is, bringing about history and all things that take place. He goes on to say, let him, therefore, who would beware of such unbelief, always bear in mind that there is no random power or agency or motion in the creatures, who are so governed by the secret counsel of God, that nothing happens but what he has knowingly and willingly decreed. Again, first then, let the reader remember that the providence we mean is not one which the deity, sitting idly in heaven, looks on at what is taking place in the world, but one by which he, as it were, holds the helms and overrules all events. Next quote. For what, I ask, is meant by government? If it be not to preside so as to regulate the destiny of that over which you preside. I do not, however, totally repudiate what is said of an of a universal providence, provided, on the other hand, it is conceded to me that the world is governed by God, not only because he maintains the order of nature appointed by him, but because he takes a special charge of every one of his works. Next quote. This being admitted, it is certain that not a drop of rain falls without the express command of God. Next quote. Will it now be said that man is moved by God according to the bent of his nature? Listen to this one. This is an important one because this is very typical of the compatibilist position that man is free to act within his nature. We're totally depraved, so we can only do that which is evil. Pay attention to what he says here. Will it now be said that man is moved by God according to the bent of his nature, but that man himself gives the movement any direction he pleases? Sounds very compatibilistic, doesn't it? Were it truly so, man would have full disposal of his own ways. To this, it will perhaps be answered that man can do nothing without the power of God. Next quote. It is a strange infatuation, surely for miserable men who cannot even give utterance, except in so far as God pleases, to begin to act without him. Two more quotes, folks. We're almost done. Those who deny that God holds the reins of government will say that this was contrary to ordinary practice, whereas I infer from it that no wind ever rises or rages without his special command. And this is the last quote I'm going to give. But we hold that God is the disposer and ruler of all things, that from the remotest eternity, according to his own wisdom, he decreed what he was to do, and now by his power executes what he decreed. Hence we maintain that by his providence, not heaven and earth and inanimate creatures only, let me read that one more time, that not just heaven and earth and inanimate objects only, but also the counsels and wills of men are so governed as to move exactly in the course which he has destined. Now, who did I just quote? I'm sure many of you already know who I was quoting. I was quoting the famous John Calvin. Yes, folks, that was John Calvin saying that God actively brings about that which he has decreed. So much so, as the last quote says, that not just heaven and earth and inanimate objects are moved by God, but also the counsels and wills of men are so governed as to move exactly in the course in which he has destined them. So, according to my opponents on Pal Talk, Mr. Paradox and, ironically, the Calvinist. Calvin himself is a blasphemer, a hyper-Calvinist. He's out of step with the Reformed faith, and he's a fatalist. Interesting, folks. So let's keep in mind who's the real Calvinist here. Myself, the determinist, who believes that God not only decrees whatsoever comes to pass, but that he actively brings about that which he decrees. So much so, as Calvin says, that nothing can happen outside of his power, his active power. Now, let me just throw a few verses out there for you to think on. Now, I mean, I can go on with this, but just to ponder on, we can think of Acts 17, where Paul says that in him, that is God, we live and move and have our being. We can think of Philippians 2:13, which says that it is God who is at work in us both to will and to do. We can think of Hebrews, where it says the entire universe is upheld by the power of his word. We can think of Colossians chapter 1, where it says that all things hold together in Christ. And elsewhere in like Isaiah, where it says that God decrees, not only decrees what comes to pass, but that he will bring it to pass. That is, God will bring it to pass. Not some laws, not gravity, not the law of thermodynamics, their entropy, or God brings it about. If you believe in natural law, if you believe in the science that says gravity holds us to Earth and holds the planets in alignment, and that's not Calvinism, and that's certainly not the Bible. The Bible and Calvinism teaches that it is God who governs the universe. You don't float out into space because God keeps your butt on the ground. This chair that I'm sitting in, the reason why I don't go crashing to the ground is not because the molecules somehow have this innate ability and power within themselves to hold together. If God let go of this chair, I would go crashing to the ground because it is only holding together by the power of his word. That is Calvinism. That is the Bible, my friends. Determinism. It's time to get rid of this compatibilist nonsense that teaches, well, God just decrees what's going to happen, but there's some other power out there that brings it about. Not according to John Calvin, and most certainly not according to the Bible. All right, guys, God bless. Peace.